Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're diving into something that's going to fundamentally change how you think about money, wealth, and why most financial advice completely fails. The question we're exploring is this: why do poor people misunderstand wealth? And more importantly, why does this misunderstanding trap them in poverty for generations? Now, before you click away thinking this is going to be another lecture about budgeting or saving money, I promise you, this is different. What I'm going to show you is that poor people and rich people aren't just playing the same game at different skill levels. They're playing completely different games with completely different rules. And once you understand this, everything about the economy, about inequality, about why you can't seem to get ahead no matter how hard you try, it all makes sense. So let's get into it. First, we need to talk about why almost all financial advice is fundamentally flawed. And it comes down to something called survivorship bias. Here's what I mean. All of our financial advice comes from studying rich people who succeeded. We read about Warren Buffett, we study successful investors, we analyze billionaire habits, and then we say, okay, they did X, Y, and Z, so if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get rich too. But here's what we're missing. For every Warren Buffett who invested a certain way and became a billionaire, there are literally thousands of people who invested the exact same way and went completely bankrupt. We don't write books about them. We don't study them. We don't even talk about them. They're invisible. So all of our financial advice comes from survivors. And survivor advice doesn't work for people who aren't survivors yet. Think about that for a second. It's like going to a casino, finding the one person who won big at roulette, and then telling everyone else, just do what they did. Put all your money on red. You're ignoring the hundreds of people who did the exact same thing and lost everything. The core misunderstanding, correlation versus causation. Here's something you absolutely need to understand, and I'm going to repeat it because it's that important. Just because rich people do certain things does not mean that doing those things will make you rich. Let me give you an example. We know that wealthy people invest in the stock market, right? They have diversified portfolios. They understand compound interest. So the advice is always just invest, build a portfolio, learn about compound interest. But here's the truth. Just because you invest in the stock market does not mean you'll become wealthy. Just because you read financial books does not mean you'll build wealth. The causation runs the other way. If you're already wealthy, you will invest in the stock market because you have money you don't need for immediate survival. You have surplus money sitting around that you can afford to put at risk. If you're rich, you'll naturally learn about compound interest because it actually applies to your life. You have enough money and enough time for compounding to work. Does that make sense? It's not that investing makes you rich. It's that being rich allows you to invest. And this misunderstanding, this backwards causation, is at the heart of why financial literacy doesn't actually matter that much. Financial literacy is a lie. Yeah, I said it. Financial literacy is basically a lie sold to poor people. Economic studies have shown this. It doesn't really matter how much you know about money. If you don't understand wealth at a fundamental level, not just the mechanics, but the actual nature of wealth, you'll stay poor. But if you truly understand wealth, you can build generational fortune even without formal financial education. So what's the difference? What are rich people understanding that poor people aren't? Let me break down 3 fundamental differences in how poor people and rich people think about money and wealth. Difference first, time horizon blindness. The first major difference is what I call time horizon blindness. Poor people think wealth is about having money now, right now, today. If you have $10,000 in your bank account, a poor person thinks, I am rich. But if you're a wealthy person and you have $10,000 in your bank account, you think, this is nothing. This is basically zero. Here's the key distinction. Poor people see wealth as an amount, a number. I have X dollars, therefore I'm wealthy. Rich people see wealth as independence from labor. When a rich person says I'm wealthy, they don't mean I have a lot of money. They mean I never have to work again and my lifestyle doesn't change. So a poor person with $10,000 thinks they're temporarily rich. Maybe they can take a vacation or buy something nice. A rich person with $10,000 thinks they're basically broke because that $10,000 doesn't buy them time. It doesn't buy them freedom from having to work. And this goes back to time horizons. Poor people think about money in terms of weeks or months. Can I pay rent this month? Can I buy groceries this week? Rich people think about money in terms of forever. Will this asset generate income for my grandchildren? Poor people optimize for having money now. Rich people optimize for controlling time forever. And because they're thinking on completely different time scales, they make completely different decisions. A poor person saves money in a bank account because they might need it next month. That makes total sense from their perspective. A rich person would never keep significant money in a bank account because that money isn't working for them. It's not buying them more time or freedom. Completely different games. Different second, asset versus income confusion. The second major difference is what I call asset versus income confusion. Here's a test. If someone makes $300,000 a year, are they wealthy? Most people would say yes. A doctor making $300,000 a year, that's rich, right? Poor people look at that and think, wow, that doctor is living the dream. But rich people look at that same doctor and think, that doctor is a high-income worker, but they're not wealthy. Here's why. The doctor makes $300,000 a year, but they have to work to make that money. If the doctor stops working, the income stops immediately. So the doctor has high income, but they're not actually wealthy. Now compare that to a landlord who owns apartment buildings that generate $100,000 a year in rent. The landlord makes less money than the doctor, but the landlord is wealthier. Why? Because the landlord doesn't have to work for that $100,000. The buildings generate money automatically while the landlord sleeps. Here's the key misunderstanding. Poor people optimize for income. They want a higher salary, a better paying job, a promotion, a raise. Rich people optimize for equity and ownership. They want things that generate money without requiring their labor. Poor people save cash in a bank. Rich people buy things that make more money. Poor people work for money. Rich people make money work for them. And this is why when you tell a poor person you should invest, they don't really understand what that means. To them, investing means putting money somewhere they can't touch it. It feels like losing money, like making that money unavailable. But to a rich person, investing means buying something that will generate more money. It feels like planting seeds that will grow into trees. Completely different mindset. The poor person sees an expense. The rich person sees an asset. Difference third, risk perception inversion. The third major difference is what I call risk perception inversion. Poor people think that having a job is safe and starting a business is risky. This is just common sense, right? Get a good job, that's the safe path. Starting a business, that's risky, you might lose everything. But rich people think the exact opposite. Rich people think depending on one income source is incredibly risky. Having only a job is dangerous. But having multiple income streams from different sources, that's safe. Let me give you an example. A poor person has a job that pays $50,000 a year. They're terrified of quitting because if they quit, they have zero income. So they stay at that job even if they hate it, even if it's going nowhere, even if it's destroying their health, because the alternative is no income. That feels extremely risky. But a rich person looks at that exact same situation and thinks, oh my God, you only have one income source? What if you get fired? What if the company goes bankrupt? What if you get sick and can't work? You're literally one bad event away from zero income. That's terrifying. See the inversion? Poor people optimize for stability and poverty. They want a steady paycheck, benefits, predictability, even if it means staying poor forever. At least it's stable poverty. Rich people optimize for volatility with a safety net. They'll take risks, start businesses, make investments that might fail, because even if those things fail, they have other income sources. They have assets. They have a cushion. And this is why when rich people give advice like just start a business or invest in yourself or take risks, poor people think that's insane advice. Because for a poor person, taking a risk means potential homelessness. For a rich person, taking a risk means maybe this doesn't work out and I try something else. Completely different games. The poor person is playing not to lose everything. The rich person is playing to multiply everything. The delayed gratification myth. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Let's talk about delayed gratification. Everyone says rich people are good at delayed gratification, right? Rich people can wait for rewards. Poor people want everything now. That's why they stay poor. But think about this more carefully. Who actually delays gratification more? Poor people delay gratification constantly. They skip meals to save money. They wear the same old clothes for years. They never go on vacation. They never buy anything fun for themselves. Their entire life is delayed gratification. Rich people buy what they want when they want it. They go on vacations. They buy nice clothes. They eat at expensive restaurants. They hire people to do things they don't want to do. So who's really delaying gratification? Here's the actual difference, and this is crucial. It's not about willpower. It's about certainty of return. When a rich person delays gratification, they know the reward is coming. If a rich person invests money, they're confident they'll get returns because they have enough money that even if one investment fails, they have others that will succeed. But when a poor person delays gratification, there's no guarantee of any reward whatsoever. If a poor person skips meals to save $100, they might save that money, and then their car breaks down and the entire $100 is gone. So they sacrifice for nothing. The reward never came. It's not that poor people are bad at delaying gratification. It's that poor people have learned through experience that delaying gratification often leads to no reward at all. So they're actually being perfectly rational when they don't delay gratification. They're responding accurately to their environment. Subtraction versus multiplication, two different economic games. This brings us to the core concept that explains everything. Poor people and rich people are playing two completely different economic games. I call this subtraction versus multiplication. Poor people play the subtraction game. You start with a little bit of money, and every expense subtracts from that money. The goal is to subtract as slowly as possible to make the money last as long as you can. Rich people play the multiplication game. You start with a lot of money, and every expense is actually an investment that should multiply your money. The goal is to multiply as fast as possible. Let me give you some concrete examples of how this plays out. When a poor person's car breaks down, that's subtraction. Minus $500. They're now $500 poorer than they were before. When a rich person's car breaks down and they pay $500 to fix it, it doesn't affect their wealth at all, because their wealth is in assets that are still multiplying while they sleep. Or think about debt. For poor people, debt is subtraction. It's high interest credit cards and payday loans. Every month, you're subtracting more and more. You're getting poorer. For rich people, debt is multiplication. It's low interest mortgages and business loans. You're using other people's money to buy assets that make you richer. Same word, debt, but completely different meanings in these two different games. And here's the critical insight. You cannot win a multiplication game using subtraction strategies. It's mathematically impossible. The emergency room decision. Let me illustrate this with a specific example. The emergency room decision. If you're rich and you have a minor health issue, your wrist hurts a little bit, you go to the emergency room immediately. You don't wait. You don't think about the cost. You just go. Why? Because you're playing the multiplication game. Your health is an asset. You invest in maintaining your assets. Spending $500 to check out your wrist is protecting a much larger asset, your ability to work and generate income. But if you're poor and your wrist hurts, you wait. You see if it gets worse. You take some over-the-counter pain medication. You hope it goes away on its own. Why? Because you're playing the subtraction game. Going to the emergency room costs money, maybe $500, maybe $2,000. Every expense subtracts from your very limited resources. So you wait and hope you don't have to spend the money. And people look at this and say, poor people make bad health decisions. But they're not bad decisions. They're rational decisions given the game they're playing. If you're playing subtraction and every expense makes you poorer, then avoiding expenses is smart. The problem is that sometimes your risk doesn't get better. Sometimes it gets worse. Sometimes waiting turns a minor $500 problem into a major $10,000 problem, but the poor person was still making the rational choice given their constraints. the college major decision, or think about college majors. A rich kid goes to college and their parents say, explore, find yourself, try different classes, change your major if you want. This is about discovering your passion. Why? Because the rich parents are playing the multiplication game. They see college as an investment in their child's network and personal development. The specific degree doesn't matter that much. They know their kid will be fine because they have connections, family money, a safety net. A poor kid goes to college and everyone tells them, pick something practical, get a degree that guarantees a job. Computer science, engineering, nursing, don't waste time on art or philosophy or history. You need a job. Why? Because the poor parents are playing the subtraction game. College costs money, tens of thousands of dollars. That's a huge subtraction. So it better result in a high-paying job or the whole thing was a waste. The poor kid can't afford to explore because exploration might lead to no job. And no job means all that money was subtracted for nothing. Same activity, going to college, completely different approaches based on which game you're playing. Why financial advice fails. So now we can answer the big question. Why does financial advice that works for rich people completely fail poor people? The answer is that financial advice assumes you're playing the multiplication game. All financial advice, all the books, all the podcasts, all the courses, they all assume you have surplus money to invest. They assume you can delay gratification and get a reward. They assume you can take risks because you have a safety net. But if you're playing the subtraction game, none of that advice makes sense. When a rich person tells a poor person just invest in index funds, they don't understand that the poor person doesn't have money to invest. Every dollar they have is already allocated to survival. When a poor person tells a rich person you need to budget carefully, the rich person doesn't understand why they would need to budget when their assets generate more income than they spend. They're speaking different languages because they're playing different games. Class defection, the painful path to switching games now. You might be thinking, okay, but if poor people just learned about wealth, if they understood these concepts, couldn't they escape? And the answer is, it's really, really hard. Let me tell you about something I call class defection. Class defection is when a poor person abandons their original community and tries to join the wealthy community. The most common ways this happens are marrying into wealth or getting adopted by a rich mentor. What happens is you learn by immersion. It's like moving to a foreign country to learn a new language. You're surrounded by people who understand wealth, and slowly you start to understand it too. You see how they think. You see how they make decisions. You pick up the cultural codes. But here's the brutal part. When you do this, you often lose connection to your original community. Your family doesn't recognize you anymore. Your old friends think you've changed, that you think you're better than them. You're code switching constantly, acting rich around rich people, acting poor around poor people, and it's absolutely exhausting. Let me give you a concrete example. A poor kid gets a full scholarship to an Ivy League school. Suddenly they're surrounded by rich kids. They learn how rich people talk, how they dress, what they value, how they think about money. The poor kid becomes culturally rich. They learn the language of wealth. But when they go home for Thanksgiving, their family thinks they're acting weird. Why are you talking like that? Why are you so different? The family feels like they've lost their kid, and the kid feels like they don't belong anywhere. Not rich enough for rich people, not poor enough for poor people anymore. This is why class defection is so rare. It's not just about learning new information. It's about abandoning your entire identity and community. And most people aren't willing to do that. It's too psychologically painful. Why knowledge isn't enough. So here's another critical point. Knowing about money doesn't make you rich, because wealth isn't about information. It's about circumstance. You can read every book about investing, but if you don't have money to invest, the information is completely useless. You can understand compound interest perfectly, but if you're living paycheck to paycheck, compound interest doesn't apply to your life. To build wealth, you need three things. Money you don't need for survival time, to let investments grow psychological safety, to take risks. If you don't have all three, you cannot build wealth, period. And poor people, by definition, don't have these three things. They don't have surplus money. They don't have time because they need returns quickly. They don't have psychological safety because one bad decision means catastrophe. So when people say, why don't poor people just learn about wealth? They're completely missing the point. Poor people can learn about wealth. They can understand the concepts perfectly, but understanding and being able to implement are two entirely different things. It's like explaining to someone how to swim while they're actively drowning. The information is correct, but it's not useful in that moment. Why the system stays stable, the psychology of confusion. Now here's the really interesting part. Why does this system stay stable? Why doesn't it change? And the answer is going to sound crazy, but hear me out. Poor people paradoxically benefit from staying confused about wealth. Let me explain. If a poor person truly understands wealth, truly understands that everything they've been doing is wrong, that they're playing the wrong game, that their entire strategy for life is fundamentally flawed, that's psychologically devastating. It's much easier to believe I'm doing the right things, I'm just unlucky. The system is against me, but my decisions are fine. That's a comfortable belief. It protects your ego. It lets you feel like a good person who's just had bad luck. But if you admit that you don't understand wealth, if you admit that you've been playing the wrong game your entire life, that means admitting you've wasted years, maybe decades, doing the wrong things. And that's too painful for most people to accept. Plus, there's community reinforcement. Everyone around you thinks the same way. Your family, your friends, your neighbors, they're all playing the subtraction game. They all think having a job is safe. They all think saving cash is smart. So if you suddenly start thinking differently, you're not just rejecting the beliefs, you're rejecting your community. And humans are social creatures. We need community. So most people choose community over truth. The brutal truth about generational wealth, so the system stays stable because both groups benefit from the confusion. Rich people benefit because if poor people understood wealth, they demand systemic change. They'd say, wait a minute, the game is rigged. This isn't fair. But as long as poor people think they're just playing the same game as rich people, just losing, they blame themselves instead of the system. And poor people benefit from staying confused because understanding the truth is too painful, so they maintain their beliefs, stay in their communities, keep playing the subtraction game, and they pass these beliefs on to their children. And the cycle continues generation after generation. The rich stay rich because they teach their kids the multiplication game. The poor stay poor because they teach their kids the subtraction game. When we ask why do some people build generational wealth while others stay broke forever, the answer isn't about intelligence or work ethic or financial literacy. It's about which game you're playing. And you can't choose which game to play. The game is chosen for you by your birth circumstances. If you're born into a family playing multiplication, you learn multiplication. If you're born into a family playing subtraction, you learn subtraction. And switching games, that requires abandoning everything you know, everyone you love, and admitting that everything you believe was wrong. Very few people can do that. The tragic reality. So what do poor people get wrong about how wealth actually works? Everything. Not because they're stupid, but because they're playing a different game where the rules are completely different. And the tragic thing is that the rules of the subtraction game make perfect sense if you're trying to survive. They just don't build wealth. And nobody tells you that you're playing the wrong game. Everyone just tells you to play harder, play smarter, play better. But you can't win the multiplication game using subtraction strategies. It's mathematically impossible. Look, I know this is heavy. I know it might make you angry or sad or frustrated. Some of you are probably thinking about your own lives, your own families, and recognizing these patterns. If this episode resonated with you, I need you to share it. Send it to people who are trying to understand why they can't seem to get ahead no matter how hard they work. Send it to people who keep getting the same financial advice that never seems to actually help. Leave a review telling me your experience. Are you playing subtraction or multiplication? Did you ever successfully switch games? What did it cost you? Subscribe if you haven't already, because next episode we're going to talk about what it actually takes to switch games. The real steps, not the fantasy advice. You can find everything in the show notes. Connect with me on social media. And remember, understanding that you're playing the wrong game isn't giving up. It's the first step toward figuring out how to switch games. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay aware, stay critical, and don't blame yourself for a system that was designed before you were born.